Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and this video we're breaking down Star Wars Return of the Jedi. Filled with Easter eggs, hidden details, and lots of things going on with it, this tops off what's arguably one of the greatest trilogies of all time. Throughout this video, we're going to be going through it scene by scene to talk about all the things you missed, as well as those well-loved special edition changes. Coming off the back of two of the biggest blockbusters of all time, George Lucas had the galaxy in the palm of his hands, but he was faced with the almost impossible task of sticking the landing for a film series that had completely changed cinema. I know looking back, people tend to complain about the Ewoks and how Luke's Jabba's plan makes no sense, but when I watched this as a kid, I never had any problems with it. I guess I've been lucky in that, because of my love for it, none of the criticisms ever bothered me, and it's still a movie that I absolutely adore. I think the biggest problem with the movie is that it unfortunately had the difficult task of following A New Hope and Empire, which to me are still some of the best films ever made. Now, Empire was of course a massive success, and at that point it was one of the highest grossing films of all time.
Impressive. Most impressive.
The sequel was quickly put into production, with Lucas then financing the entire thing. Continuing to remain as a producer, Lucas began searching for directors, with him initially approaching longtime friend Steven Spielberg. However, due to issues with the Directors Guild, Lucas unfortunately had his hands tied.
The filmmaker found himself unexpectedly mired in Hollywood politics. To preserve the dramatic opening sequences of his films, Lucas wanted the screen credits to come at the end of the movies. It was a highly unusual choice. And for the first Star Wars, the Writers Guild and Directors Guild had allowed it. But when Lucas did the same for the sequel, they fined him over $250,000 and even attempted to pull Empire from theaters. Next, the DGA went after Irvin Kershner. To protect his director, Lucas paid all the fines to the guilds, but the situation left him feeling frustrated and persecuted.
Lucas was so upset that he dropped out of the Directors Guild, the Writers Guild, and the Motion Picture Association.
Thus, Spielberg was unable to do it, and Lucas turned back to David Lynch again. He apparently approached him for Empire, but he still felt his style was too distant from what Lucas wanted, and David Cronenberg also declined the job. Eventually settling on Richard Marquand, it's actually thought that Lucas somewhat ghost-directed the film due to Marquand's inexperience with special effects. At one point, Richard joked it was like trying to direct King Lear with Shakespeare in the next room, as Lucas was on set for a large part of the production. Now, during Empire, he was in the process of setting up ILM and a number of different production studios, so he wasn't physically able to be on set as much. However, man now had way more free time, and this was the case in the writing too. Working once more with Lawrence Kasdan, the screenplay was created with the original title being Return of the Jedi before it was then switched to Revenge.
George came to me and he said, the title of episode 6 is Return of the Jedi. And I said, I think it's a weak title. And he came back 1 or 2 days later and he says, we're calling it Revenge of the Jedi.
However, this idea of revenge, it never sat right with Lucas. He felt like revenge was against the Jedi way, and thus it went back to the original before the film hit cinemas. And they also had a bit of an issue with Harrison Ford that was a carryover from Empire. Though Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher signed on for the sequels, they never actually got Ford to agree to them. Bringing him back for Empire had been a bit of a negotiation, and he actually wanted Han to get killed off in the carbonite scene. His status as an actor had also risen with Indiana Jones, and Lucas even went into crafting the screenplay with the idea that there was no way he was going to come back. However, Howard Kazanjian got lucky when dealing with his agent Phil Gersh, who was on vacation at the time of the negotiations. When Howard called up the agency, it was luckily his son who answered, and together the pair then negotiated the deal. So David, his son, he saved Star Wars and he's a bloody top bloke. Now, Phil wasn't too happy when he got back, and he thought they'd taken advantage of his son, but Solo was on lock and he was then added to the script. Anyway, both Ford and Kasdan thought that Solo should be killed early on in the movie, and this would put some stakes into the rest of the film.
I thought Han Solo should die. I thought he ought to sacrifice himself for the other two characters.
I also felt someone had to go. You know, I felt Someone had to die.
I said, he's got no mama, he's got no papa, he's got no future. He has no story responsibilities at this point. So let's allow him to commit self-sacrifice.
This would happen during a raid on Endor, and then Luke would end up like a lone gunslinger and the solo hero. However, Lucas shut down the idea, and it has been thought this was down to how many Han Solo toys they'd managed to sell over the last couple of years. Ford said Lucas didn't see a future in dead Han toys, and the Solos stayed alive until the end of the film. Now, the Ewoks were also originally Wookiees, but I'm guessing those toy sales made Lucas change his mind to make something cuter. Yoda was also someone who was completely absent from the film, but director Richard Marquand felt like they needed to bring things full circle from the prior movie. Lucas also saw this as an opportunity to confirm Vader was indeed Luke's father, as many suspected the twist at the end of Empire was actually a lie. This included James Earl Jones, who didn't believe they were related until he sat down and read the script for Return. Now, production began at Elstree Studios, with the movie occupying 9 sets. With a budget of $32.5 million, Lucas actually saved roughly $18 million by using his own company ILM to carry out the special effects. Given the working title Blue Harvest will not do a weekly planet, and this was due to the production feeling like they were being ripped off. Because of the success of the prior movies, it was assumed that Lucasfilm had enough money to build an actual Death Star, and thus they constantly got overcharged when they went out to buy things for the film. People felt like they could invoice more because the company could afford it, and thus they created the working title to keep it out the public eye. Blue Harvest filmed from January to May 1982, being a shoot that was 6 years shorter than Empire. This allowed ILM to get way more time to work on the effects, including a massive space battle at the end, which would culminate on a richly detailed set of tunnels in the second Death Star. Now, the movie also ended up leading to the creation of THX due to some test screenings failing to output several of the sound effects and themes in the movie. Thus, Lucas did the old, if you want to do something, you've got to do it yourself, and he implemented THX, which became a staple in the industry. All in all, the entire saga not only changed a lot of things for Lucas, but it also changed a lot of things for cinema in general. Now, the movie begins with the usual text crawl, but there's a slight difference to what's come before and what followed. The crawl ends with 3 ellipses, whereas in every other title crawl it ends with 4. This was actually put in place because Lucas wanted to leave us with the idea there'd be no other films after this, though he did have ideas of doing 3 trilogies at the time. Lucas also said he was inspired by Lord of the Rings and its 3rd iteration, Return of the King, which he felt was a fitting way to close things out. Now, like a lot of Star Wars titles, there's a layered meaning to this one, with the titular Jedi more likely being a reference to Anakin rather than being Luke. Luke never really went away, and thus the returning Jedi here makes more sense when you think of it as being Anakin. Now, you can of course apply to Luke as well, and the first sentence of the crawl talks about how Luke returned to his home planet. The idea of returning is also a staple of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which we've talked about in these breakdowns before. Luke went through all the steps beat by beat in the trilogy, with the final stage being the return. We've also seen this reflected in his colour scheme throughout, with his clothing going from white to black across the 3 films. In A New Hope, he of course wore white, which changed to grey when he got to Empire. Come Return, he's dressed in all black, and fans at the time thought this might show he'd actually turned to the dark side. When the original screenwriting process for the movie began, they did toy with the idea of making him turn evil, and we'd then wonder if he turned back again, which ties into the idea of the return. Elements of this are still apparent in the film, with Luke arriving in a dark silhouette akin to Vader showing up on the Tantive 4 in A New Hope. However, the flap on the front of the uniform eventually folds down, symbolically showing a lighter side within him. Now, speaking of A New Hope, before Force Awakens basically became a remake of it, this movie actually redid a lot of the elements of the film. For example, we start on Tatooine and have another Death Star, with the Emperor sort of being a switch out of Tarkin. Even the opening shots almost look exactly the same, and we have a Star Destroyer coming into view from the exact same angle. Below it is a planet, and off in the distance we can see the Death Star, which has replaced the original moon shot. Again, it's sort of like poetry they rhyme, and we see Vader arriving on the second Death Star. Smoke comes down off the ramp, and it's very similar to the cloud that also surrounded him when he stepped through the door in A New Hope. Now, these shots were later riffed on in Ahsoka, when Baylan and Shin Hati arrived on the New Republic cruiser. There's lots of things that Ahsoka actually takes from this film, which we'll talk about as well, because it's still fresh in my mind. Now, on the shuttle, we also see the language Arabesh, which was created by Lucas after replacing the original English words in A New Hope. Also, as the shuttle comes in, I've just noticed for the first time you can see a TIE bomber parked up in the bottom of the hangar, which we get a clearer view of in the next shot. Now on Tatooine, we see C-3PO and R2 arriving at Jabba's palace, which echoes their journey arriving on the planet in A New Hope. Learning that Lando and Chewbacca never return from here, this sort of foreshadows what the next parts of the plan are. Chatting with a security guard that speaks Huttese, we also get a vastly expanded front door for the special editions. Side by side we can see how they stretched it out, and this was going to give the appearance that it was way more expansive. However, yeah, nitpick, when they get inside, we can see it's a lot smaller, so I never really got the point of why they did this in the first place, and that's mainly with a lot of the special edition changes in general. Anyway, we arrive to see Jabba getting fanned by a Jawa and slobbing out, dining on frogs.
George said, "Oh, I need something that's, alien and grotesque. That's like Sydney Greenstreet." Oh, okay. When I had kind of gotten this idea down to this big slug-like thing that is just this big pulsating mass of flesh. At one point, I had a fez on one of the characters, like Sydney Greenstreet. And then Stuart Freeborn in England, his job was to fabricate the thing, and that was operated with one puppeteer for each arm, two puppeteers for the arms, another guy doing the head, another guy, radio control guy, doing the eyes. There's like a couple little people in it, pulling things to make the tail move around. It was quite a thing.
Jabba was later added into the special editions of A New Hope, with Lucas originally planning to include him. He had to cut these scenes because of time and money, which was rectified when they had the resources to finally put him in. He's joined by Bib Fortuna, and this is a character that would later go on to take over the throne. Sat by Jabba is also the quacking monkey lizard Salacious Crumb, who Lucas wanted to be sort of the equivalent of a laughing court jester. 3PO and R2 have come to deliver a message from Luke, which I always loved growing up as a kid. It's something that these days we see Denzel doing all the time in the Equalizer movies, and I love how he's basically just saying, we don't have to play f*** around and find out, just give me Han back and you can crawl away from this. It's so badass, but we watch as he rejects this, and the droids are taken to the cells that lie beneath the palace. We see a gonk droid being tortured and also catch a white droid against the back wall, which 3PO bangs into. Now, this was actually a reused prop from the Sandcrawler in A New Hope, with it being in the corner when 3PO and R2 talk. Now we see Jabba dancing away to the Max Rebo band, who ended up returning in the Book of Boba Fett. The musical number here was originally quite scaled back, with the puppet of Snice Noodles not really operating that well. In these shots though, you can catch Lando before they updated the performance for the special editions. This disguise was later brought into Solo, with Woody Harrelson's character Beckett wearing it and leaving it on the Falcon for Lando to then find and use. Also, apologies, I know I'm going to keep referencing movies that come down the line, but I feel like if I don't point them out, then I'm personally going to go insane, being like, I should have just mentioned it, I shouldn't have been scared. Either way, Joe Yauza, I'm sorry guys, I know you hate them. Either way, Joe Yauza was added into these as well, with his vocal performance being based on Joe Cocker. Written by John Williams' son Joseph Williams, he was also a lead member in the band Toto. Now the song's titled Lapti Nek, which translates into Huttese to mean work it out. You can also catch a floating mic flying around the backup singers, and I have to admit, this song, it always makes me tap my feet.
Move this man!
Now, the dancer Ula is dropped into the Rancor pit, with her backstory being pretty dark. Ula was part of the Twi'lek clan on Ryloth before she was basically kidnapped and trafficked by Bib Fortuna. Jabba demonstrates his callous disregard for life with Ula, and at this point, Plan B's put in place. We hear a gunshot and then catch a Rodian spinning round, who ends up standing behind C-3PO as he asks this.
What did I say?
This guy was actually wearing the same vest that Leia had on during the start of Empire Strikes Back, which I kind of feel like is the people on the set giving us a clue that this is actually her. Might be a reach, but yeah, she arrives disguised as the bounty hunter Bouche, and in a bit of behind the scenes info, the numbers 1138 are etched into her helmet, which you can see in the photographs of it. This is a nod to Lucas's film THX 1138, and this number's appeared in all the trilogy movies so far.
Cell block 1138.
Send roads 10 and 11 to Station 38.
Now, upon whipping out a thermal detonator, we watch as Boba Fett draws his gun, and they actually had to flip this shot so it looked like he was aiming in the right place. The antenna on the head's normally on the other side, but they found it didn't match up with the way he walked off, so they ended up spinning it around. Now, after a shot of the Warden, binary sunsets, we see Leia approaching the carbonite case as Jabba's crew seemingly sleeps. In the top left, we can see a Tauntaun head hanging up, which of course would be a rare item on a desert planet. I love how in the curtains drawn you can also see a Gran with their hand over 3PO's mouth, and this is so that he doesn't shout and try and warn his friends. Leia is grabbed and she ends up wearing a metallic bikini that fueled a lot of teenage fantasies for most of people my age. Most of the life this stuck with you. And it's meant to echo Flash Gordon once more, with Jabba later saying she'd come to appreciate him, which was supposed to reference Ming the Merciless forcing Dale Arden to marry him. As for her bikini, there were actually two versions of this made, with the second being rubber so that Carrie could move about easier. This is what they whip out during most of the action scenes, and it was due to how uncomfortable that the metallic one was. Luke arrives at this point and we get further teasers that he might be turning evil due to him force choking the guards, which is a signature Vader move. Using the Jedi mind trick, he gets Bib to take him directly to Jabba, but we actually see through Jabba that those who are mentally strong don't fall fully to it. You will like the like button, and he's dropped into the pit where he comes face to face with the Rancor, who he defeats by throwing a skull at a door switch. I always thought this was a rock, but nope, slow it down, and you can actually see this as a human skull, which belonged to the character Bildo Quirv. There's actually a big backstory that's been written for them, because it wouldn't be Star Wars if they didn't have an expansive backstory, and they carry the moniker of having the most important skull in the galaxy. The Rancor Batista is killed, and we see my man got it that his pet's died. Now, in the expanded lore, we learn Batista actually saved his life, and the pair have bonded ever since then. The Bad Batch told us about the sacred bond that Rancors have with their owners, and this was explored in an episode when the Batch got a young Rancor named Muchi for Jabba. Originally intended to be a man in a suit, they ended up using a rod puppet after the initial effect didn't seem convincing enough. Recording Ben Burtt's dog Max, they created the creature's signature sound by getting its barks and growls and then pitching them down. Now from here they're taken to the Sarlacc pit, and in the build up to it we see some migrating banthas. They would often get caught by Tusken Raiders, who would use them as rides like we saw in the first film. And the pit itself was updated to have a beak-like head for the special editions, as Lucas felt the creature didn't feel alive enough. R2 then gets into play so he can launch Luke's lightsaber, and Boba Fett's the only character who notices he's doing this. I would have sounded the alarm, but it allows Luke to launch his plan to destroy Jabba and his cronies. As we see Jabba's soldiers moving through the barge, I love how you can catch a mural of Jabba hanging up, and it shows the guy's ego's bigger than he is. Now Boba Fett of course gets thrown into the Sarlacc pit, with him escaping in the expanded lore and his solo series. Lucas has admitted he still to this day has no idea why the character became so popular, and kinda regrets not giving him a more impactful death. When working on the 2004 DVD release, he actually planned on including an extra moment where we saw Fett escape the pit. However, in the end he decided against this, as he feared it could tease things that he'd never get to make. Luke's lightsaber is also green, but originally it was planned that it was gonna be the classic blue. If you go back and look at the posters, you can see this in the marketing, showing what the original plan for the blade was gonna be. However, a number of issues popped up when they made the movie, with the first being that the blue got lost against the skies of Tatooine. They also felt there might be confusion over how he lost it during Empire, and then it turned back up, though us nerds would have been like, look mate, it's a completely different lightsaber. So what they did is, they had a deleted scene showing him constructing it, but it kinda slowed the pacing and stopped this big reveal of it here. So Lucas just settled on it being green, and in the expanded lore, the original one was then wielded by a clone of Luke before it was retaken and given to Luke's wife Mara Jade.
As the creator of Mara Jade,
Wait! I am not the creator of Mara Jade, and I want you to get out of this office right now.
I'm sorry, Zeb.
No way.
You brought you brought it on yourself.
I don't want you here.
I'm so sorry, George. I didn't think it would go like this.
Out.
Dad, I got your voucher.
Out!
So he just had to come up with an excuse to use that clip, because it always cracks me up and I'm a bit of a dickhead. Anyway, there's also a moment where when Boba Fett flies across the sky and hits the barge, we can see Luke kicking someone in the foreground. the kick is miles off from hitting the guy, and Mark Hamill has jokingly said that Luke actually force kicked him. And the creative team looked at a lot of swashbuckling pirate movies in order to craft this scene, and there's definitely that feeling with ropes and boats being a big thing here. Luke is also made to walk the plank, but like a lot of those pirate films, he flips it on his head. Luke is also shot in the hand as well, and this mark later returns at the end of The Force Awakens when he takes the lightsaber off Rey. Now, Billy D. Williams didn't come out unscathed either, and apparently during the scene in which Han shoots at the tentacles, the pyrotechnic went off close to his leg and it ended up burning him. His son Corey D also makes an appearance in the scene as well, with him actually playing one of Jabba's henchmen. C-3PO is also attacked by Salacious Crumb, and this led to Anthony Daniels having a real-life panic attack.
I got claustrophobia once, and I didn't even have the whole suit on. I was lying on the floor, the camera is about that far away from me. Salacious Crumb, the wonderful Salacious Crumb, animated by Tim Rose. And he's pulling out my eye.
4A, take 2. A&B. Action.
And something went in my mind, I didn't catch a breath or something, and I suddenly could feel panic just absorbing into my body.
Lost my eye. Started. Help.
And I was saying, get me out, get me out, get me out, get me out, get me out. And I just kept repeating it until they managed to whiz the head off.
Now, as a nod to longtime friend Francis Ford Coppola, Lucas had Leia choke Jabba out with her chains, which was supposed to resemble Luca Brasi's death in his movie The Godfather. Lucas was actually originally in talks to direct Apocalypse Now, but he ended up exiting it so that Coppola could take over. Now, Francis actually left a little nod to him in the movie, as the character Harrison Ford plays is called Colonel G. Lucas. The final battle involving the Ewoks also builds off the back of Lucas's original idea for the movie, with the jungle setting riffing off the back of Vietnam. Come the end of the battle, they use all manner of guerrilla tactics at their disposal, with Lucas modelling these after the Viet Cong. Anyway, they get out of there before it blows up, and don't forget the droids, which gives us a brilliant victory to start the movie off with. Han says, I owe you one now, but he owed you too, so are we not deducting that, mate? What's this maths? Anyway, in his X-Wing we see Luke examine his hand, which he covers up by putting a black glove over it. This shot's referenced later on when Luke sees Vader's missing one, echoing the fact that he could end up going down that path. Now at this point we cut to the Death Star, and amongst the fleet of TIEs we can also catch TIE Interceptors for the first time in the saga. The Emperor arrives, who's also played for the first time by Ian McDiarmid. Now this blew my mind when I was doing my research, but he was actually only 39 when he played this part. Yeah, he's just 7 years older than Mark Hamill is, but I've got to say, the man can play old. Now, according to him, he was just brought in to do a physical performance, similar to what David Prowse did with Darth Vader. This was then going to be redubbed with Clive Revill, who originally played the character in The Empire Strikes Back. However, McDiarmid completely knocked it out the park when delivering his lines, and thus they decided to stick with his performance, which has become iconic. Now, a lot of these moments where we get the wider shots were actually made using matte paintings.
So what are we looking at here?
Here is just a wonderful example of all these stormtroopers, and nobody knows that it's a matte painting. You just assume that this is a very large set. So there are some real stormtroopers on the set, and then the rest were added by the matte artist.
Vader also kneels before him, which is a similar thing to what he did during the hologram scene in Empire, showing who's really in charge. Now Luke returns to Dagobah, where he comes face to face with Yoda. I rate that the guy was just sick of answering questions, and he'd rather turn over than die than dealing with more Skywalker bullshit. However, he does spell it out that Luke needs to confront Vader to complete his training, and this word confront carries a lot with it. Rather than killing him, he just wants to face his dad because he could be the person that ends up bringing him back. Now, knowing what we know about the prequels, I actually think it makes Vader's arc better in retrospect. In the end, his love for his son is what ends up saving him, and he turns back in order to save him from the Emperor. The scene of him electrocuting Luke also gets replayed in Revenge of the Sith, with him standing there and allowing Palps to take out Mace Windu. Here he refuses to stand by and allow it to happen again, and I actually think the prequels improve all this, even though it works well on its own. He also mentions how once Yoda dies that he'll be the last Jedi, which, careful mate, we don't talk about that here. Now Yoda's last words here also build off the back of his last words in the prior film.
That boy is our last hope.
No. There is another.
Is another guy.
He adds in the word Skywalker, which is then clarified outside by Obi-Wan. He explains that Leia is his twin sister, and also how Anakin's death was caused by Vader because he killed all that he stood for. Alec Guinness only ended up shooting for 1 day for this movie, and we talked last time how he did this with Empire as well. Lucas made a deal with him, where he got 0.25 of the gross of these films, and in the end that netted him $100 million. That adjusted for inflation's roughly $400 million, meaning that he shot the stuff for A New Hope, and then basically did a couple of days on top of that and got $400 million. Now this is the only time where Luke calls him Obi-Wan instead of Ben Kenobi. Ben was the name he knew him as, but this is showing that he's now detached from him due to the lies about his father. Now we cut to Home 1 where we meet Mon Mothma alongside Mon Calamari legend Admiral Akbar. This ship ended up returning in Ahsoka, with Mothma also returning in the same room as the hologram. This table has been used several times throughout the expanded lore to plot out and plan attacks, and it is nice going back to the scene and seeing where it all began. Now Dermot Cradley, who plays General Madine, he apparently showed up to the set with a shaved face due to the script not specifying that he had to have a beard. However, the Kenner toy based on him, that had been given one, and thus they quickly grabbed a fake one to match his action figure. Setting out, we get Han saying he feels he's never going to see the Falcon again, and originally there were plans that they were going to destroy it. This would kill off Lando and also pay off on Han's bad feeling. Though Lando promised not a scratch, it got out with just losing its satellite dish, which they somewhat touched upon in Solo. During that, when it was under Lando's ownership, it had a flat dish on top, so he didn't really compensate for that when flying through the trench. Now the third act was also going to take place on the Imperial home planet called Had Abdun, with this later being renamed to, well, you guessed it, Coruscant. This was Lucas taking inspiration from Dune, with the Harkonnen home planet appearing in that. Now instead, we cut to the Emperor's throne room on the Death Star 2, and Vader asks,
What of the reports of the rebel fleet massing near Sullust?
Now, Sullust was actually named after a Roman senator, and in the expanded lore, Nien Nunb was from the planet, and he stole the shuttle that the rebels ride in, tying these lines to that. In case you don't know, Nien Nunb's Lando's co-pilot, with him speaking Kikuyu, a language that actually pulls directly from Kenya. We also see the Emperor's advisors, who would go on to form the Imperial Council in the wake of his death. Now Endor actually comes from the Bible, with it being a village found in Israel. King Saul went there before his final battle with the Philistines, and he came across someone known as the Witch of Endor. As the group leave the shuttle, we can catch a bearded commando who later pops up disguised as a scout trooper when they get caught. Retroactively, it's been said that this is Captain Rex, the legendary clone trooper from the Clone Wars in Rebels. We then get the speeder bike chase, and in this layer's middle switch is pulled back, and this is what's used to jam their communications. Now, according to IMDb trivia, the point of view shots here are achieved pretty easily, with a cameraman walking through the forest holding a Steadicam that shot 1 frame per second. Playing this back at 24 frames per second, it sped the footage up, and it made it appear at normal speed, giving this the feeling of whizzing through the forest. Now, the sound of the speeders themselves were actually created by using stock sound effects to thunder, which were then spliced together with a P-38 airplane. Now, after Leia comes off, she meets none other than Wicket the Ewok. Played by Warwick Davis, this guy's became a mainstay in Star Wars, with him being in almost all the movies that followed this, both in and out of costume. Warwick went on to play Willow, and if you haven't seen Life's Too Short with him, then I'd definitely recommend that you check that out.
That's Warwick, he's just going there.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, we actually were together on Star Wars The Phantom Menace.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we had a scene together. It was cut, though. Do you remember?
Okay.
Kenny Baker, aka R2-D2, was originally meant to play Wicket, but Destiny stepped in and gave him the shit.
Joining the cast was Warwick Davis, who was just a youngster at the time, but also a die-hard Star Wars fan.
I was an 11-year-old boy at school, and my grandmother happened to hear a radio commercial on the London radio station, and they were putting out a call for short people to be in this new Star Wars movie. I don't think anybody on the movie was quite as excited as I was. You know, being an 11-year-old on a Star Wars set, there was no stopping me.
In the role of Wicket, Davis became the film's most prominently featured Ewok. But only after Kenny Baker was suddenly taken ill.
I had this scene with Carrie and the speeder bikes in California, in the Redwoods. And I was looking forward to this. I thought, well, not Carrie's nice. I like working with Carrie.
Come the morning of the shoot, Kenny was very ill in bed with what I believe was food poisoning.
I was seriously in pain, and said, well, we've got to do it because we've got Carrie Fisher in and we've got the scene set up. So Warwick took over.
72A, take 2. A and B camera, don't forget.
I had a dog at the time, and I remember whenever he would hear a strange noise, he would tilt his head from side to side to look inquisitive, and I took those kind of movements and used them in the character. So whenever he sees something or hears a strange sound, he would, tilt his head.
Kinda wild knowing how much Warwick would go on to work with Lucasfilm, and Wicked's of course one of the most memorable new characters in the film. Now the name Ewoks based on the Native American tribe Miwok, and although they get a lot of shit, they actually carry an important message thematically throughout the entire film.
And I think they're in there to really show that you don't need technology, you need the will and the belief to take you through anything. And the fact that, the Ewoks were able to defeat the Empire only using ropes and rocks, I think that said something about them as a race of creatures.
Fighters coming in.
Doesn't matter how much machinery you have. If the will of the people is strong, they will always win.
You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
And action.
If you love CGI blinks added in, you'll love them too, and to be honest, I've never really had a problem with these cute little fuzzballs. Now from here we cut to Vader meeting with the Emperor and can catch his Red Praetorian Guards. Now the name comes from ancient Rome, and these tended to be skilled warriors who were too tasked with guarding emperors as well. Also, little tidbit, when designing the throne and window behind it, Lucas said that he wanted it to appear web-like. At the center of it is the Emperor, who would resemble a spider waiting for a prey to get caught in its net. Webs are traps that spiders build for their prey, and the entire Emperor's plan is devised as a trap.
It's a trap!
This is seen with Luke, the space battle, and Endor, all being designed to catch these key factions. The Death Star is actually fully operational, and thus the entire scheme's devised to get everyone in one place. Now that line,
it's a trap,
was originally "it's a trick," but this was changed after it got poor reactions in test screenings. Vader then manages to sense his son, whereas the Emperor doesn't.
Strange that I have not.
This shows that he's blinded to the connection Vader has with his kid, and this ultimately is how the pair beat him in the end. At this point they get caught in the net with a dead animal luring out Chewbacca. This actually has the back end of a white-tailed deer with fake teeth stuck into its butt, which is a nice little bit of trivia for you guys watching at home. Now, believing 3PO is a god, we actually have a translation for what one of the Ewoks says. Said in Ewokese, this actually translates to "that guy's wise." Could you tell? Now, they're taken to the Ewok camp to get eaten, but Luke uses the Force to show his magic so that these little murderous bears don't make a Bob a Chewbacca. And also says,
I have a really bad feeling about this.
Which is a line that's been said in every movie so far.
I got a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
Also like the video and subscribe, yeah?
Hurry up, will ya? I haven't got all day.
Now Luke reveals to Leia that he's her brother, and she recounts stories of her mother. We know in retrospect that, I don't know how you remember this, but there were actually early things in the script that would be worked in to become Padme. In the first draft, she talked about how her mother disguised as a handmaid, which she of course adopted during Phantom Menace. Now Luke surrenders and appeals to Anakin rather than Vader because he knows that's the way that he has to get through to him. Rather than going in to confront him like how he did last time, he instead hands over his weapon and gives up willingly. This is a lesson that Luke learned from the Kavan Empire, and in that Yoda told him,
only what you take with you.
Had Luke gone in unarmed, then he would have been okay, but he took his weapons and went looking for a fight. This is what happened with the duel at the end, because he went looking for a duel in both instances, and that's exactly what he found. This time he's going in to appeal to his dad directly, which is why instead of fighting, they first talk it out. Allowing Anakin to hold the Jedi lightsaber once more, this may make him remember exactly what it was like. I always felt there was a deeper meaning to how he held it and studied it, and this likely brought back memories of his time with the Order. However, he turns his back and delivers what's easily the most personal and vulnerable moment that we've seen with Vader so far.
It is too late for me, son.
I feel like him saying it's too late for him is him also thinking about how it's not too late for Luke, and the pair calling each other father and son now connects them on a more personal level. Luke has actually based this around the conflicts of Zeus and his father Kronos, which pull directly from the myths of ancient Greece. Vader also refers to the Emperor as master a lot, and he's very much a slave, almost begging to be freed. I always feel like Lucas had it planned out exactly what his origin story was, but even if he didn't, we do see through his life how he started off as a slave and then ended up being brought into a life of servitude before he was once more made a slave again. Luke is the only one who can truly free him, and it laces this moment with a lot of extra subtext. Now we end with him looking out over the forest again, and it shows a side to him that we've never really seen before. Across Endor, we see an Ewok stealing a bike, and we watch Han getting handy to get his way in. Now if you look outside as they enter, you can actually see a rebel dressed as a scout trooper putting a helmet on. Come when the rebels get caught later on, we see Margai Rex standing in a scout uniform, showing that some of the good guys were disguised as them during the fight. Now inside we see Han throwing something at a guard, and at this moment we get what sounds like a Wilhelm scream. Now this is something that's appeared throughout the Star Wars saga, with it being used in almost every film. The guy making the sound here is actually sound designer Ben Burt, who popularized the scream whilst also coining the name for it. He's used it in a number of different movies that he worked on, and this is him doing his best impression of what it sounds like. Now we cut to the battle out in space and see both A-Wings and B-Wings added to the fleet. A-Wings originally had blue paint on them instead of red, but this got lost against the blue screen and thus they had to change it. However, when they showed up in the first episode of Ahsoka, they were back to being blue because they were no longer relying on models and blue screens. Realizing the shield is still fully operational, the Rebel fleet pull away from their run and head right into the Star Destroyer fleet. Back with the group on Endor, they're saved by Ewoks, and then the fight, it just kicks off. We then hear Chewbacca's Tarzan yell, and can also catch a cameo by director Richard Marquand as one of the AT-ST drivers. The other is co-producer Richard Watts, and the roof of the AT-STs actually have a design based on German Tiger tanks from World War II. They have big blast marks on the nose of the Chewbacca one, and this at least gives the audience the heads up of who we should be following. After Leia's shot in the shoulder, we also get a brief moment where Han has to move his hand because he goes to grab it but realizes it's on fire. Now back with the Emperor, he finally taunts Luke enough to get him to strike, which is immediately blocked by Vader. Looking back, I just viewed this as him reacting quickly, but I actually think there's a deeper meaning going on with this. As the Emperor says, if he strikes him down, his journey to the dark side will be complete, and thus if he landed this, he would become a Sith. This would be because he struck him down in anger, and it would become a path that he'd never be able to walk away from. However, Vader blocking this is him stopping his son from making that mistake, and thus he doesn't succumb to the dark side and can remain in the light. Now, during the duel, Luke kicks Vader down the stairs, which is a flip on the Battle in Bespin in which he did the same thing to him. Lots of these moments in this fight echo that duel during that, but this time it's Luke who has the upper hand. Vader says,
Obi-Wan has taught you well.
And hey, look, man's got the high ground. Now back on Endor, we see his hand tricks the Imperials to going outside, and he does a little shrug that Kylo would later riff on in The Rise of Skywalker. Setting the charges, they blow the generator, allowing those in space to finally attack the Death Star. In the shadows, Luke ends up hiding out, and we see darkness covering his face, showing that he could end up succumbing to the dark side if he's not careful. Symbolically, this was later used in the saga when Anakin's return brought across the same technique as well. Like his father, love is used to lure him towards the dark side, and it's only upon his sister being mentioned that he begins to go on the attack. He plays into the Emperor's trap, managing to beat his dad and cut off his hand, but in this he's starting to lose himself. Now it's very much a reversal of the ending of Empire, with him starting to realise he's becoming the man his father is. Staring at his own hand, he then tosses his weapon, which again was used when Ahsoka passed the test with Anakin. I'll try to stop bringing all this stuff up, but it's just fresh in my mind. I do like talking about how these movies influence things down the line, because yeah, you can see how it's sort of like poetry they rhyme. Now, the Emperor realizes that he's lost and that Luke can't be turned, which is when he decides that he has to die. Vader says, "No! which was added into the special editions to tie losing Padme into potentially also losing their child. During the scene in which Vader lifts Palps above his head, we can also see electricity charging his skeleton and can actually catch metallic parts in his body, throwing him down into the Death Star reactor. He was never seen again, and never, no way, somehow did Palpatine return. At this moment, Williams also plays the Jedi theme over the top of Vader's to highlight the characters come back to the light. Lucas would actually pull several moments from this for the finale of Phantom Menace, as Darth Maul sent down the hole, much like how Palpatine was. There's also a similar shot used for Obi-Wan cradling a dying Qui-Gon, much like how Luke cradles his father here. You also have the Jedi funeral at the end, before the celebration, and looking back, it's sort of like poetry they rhyme. And this, we can see the fire burning stronger on the right side of the helmet, which is why in later appearances, it's more melted on that side. Now this scene was actually thrown in at the last minute, with it being filmed up in the hills next to Skywalker Ranch. Vader's breathing then changes to become weakened, and we see him later unmasked for the first time. Originally, David Prowse was promised he could finally get to show his face in this moment, but Lucas went back on it due to some strained on-set relationships. Lots of leaks about the movies had come out over the years, and it was suspected that Prowse had been behind them. This is why Lucas refused to tell him the true twist during Empire, and instead the script he had said Obi-Wan killed his father. In the build-up to the Returns release, the Daily Mail also ran a story revealing that Darth Vader was going to die at the end. In it, it suggested that Prowse was behind it, and thus he was kind of shut out from appearing in the film. He wasn't interviewed for the DVD release of the original trilogy, and he did carry the reputation of being behind the leaks. However, it was revealed that it was actually a crew member who did this, which kind of sucks when you look back at it. Fake scripts were actually sent out once more to cast members to dissuade them from spoiling stuff, and some of the leaks contained elements that had Lando being the last hope. Now, Sebastian Shaw was brought unaware of what he was filming, and upon arriving on set, he had no idea what was happening until he spotted his old friend Ian McDiarmid. Shaw originally had eyebrows as well when he was unmasked, but these were removed to keep it more consistent with his burns. Now, the cut on his head was also explained in later duels, with his mask getting split during Obi-Wan in Rebels. Kinda pick your poison with that, but I love how the unmasking scene shows Vader in a human way that we've never really seen before. All that we've encountered is this robotic silhouette, but this shows him as a man rather than just a machine. Now, the Death Star is destroyed at this point, with both Wedge and Lando delivering the killing blows. I love how while the Super Star Destroyer gets taken down and people start celebrating, we see as Akbar just kind of mourns those that had to die, and it's such an almost like a weight off his shoulders, seeing that the fight was actually worth it. At the time, the battle on Endor was the most expansive space fight ever put to screen, and in order to fill up the background, lots of things like the ships in the distance were actually just chewed up gum. Based on Operation Chastise, this was adapted into the movie The Dam Busters, which Lucas based a lot of the aerial attacks on. In Chastise, a group of technicians developed bouncing bombs that would skim along riverbeds and eventually hit a dam in order to destroy it. These scientists were known as boffins, and this is the time that it popularized the term. Now, Lucas actually gave this a nod as well, with the spies who got the plans for the Death Star 2 being called Bothans. Now, I dug into some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, and there was apparently a day called Black Friday in which 100,000 feet of film was apparently dumped by Lucas. This was because it couldn't be read by an optical printer, and the ILM team behind it had to go back to square one for it, and a lot of them got drunk when they heard the news. Now, back on Endor, we watched the scene that might have been altered the most over the last couple of years. Originally, this had a completely different score, which was later updated into this. Lucas also added in celebrations across the galaxy, with Coruscant being one that appeared in the special editions. I always remember seeing this back in 1997 and wondering what was going on, because Coruscant actually hadn't been fully shown to us at this point in our lives. This had a statue of the Emperor being toppled over, with us also getting a shot of Tatooine. This was then updated in 2004, with the Senate and Jedi Temple buildings appearing, and us also getting Naboo dropped into there as well. Lastly, the Force Ghosts were changed, with Hayden actually completely unaware of what he was filming. He's gone on to say that he would have played it differently, but it does kind of feel like they just dropped him into the scene without him actually being a part of it. Kind of makes no sense as well, because Luke wouldn't recognize this. Look, mate, I'm not going to go into it. I think my thoughts on it will be very obvious to you. Also, I've always kind of been like, There's no way Obi-Wan and Yoda would be standing there all friendly like with Anakin. He murdered all their mates and billions of people, and they're basically standing there like, oh, you're right, mate, you're back. Oh, nice to see you again. It would be like bumping into Hitler in the afterlife and being like, oh, how's it going, mate? How's it going? You would tell the lad to f*** right off. There's no way that the Mace Windu Force Ghost doesn't see him and kick the complete shit out of him. Now, they did go back and forth on how to end the film, and in some drafts, Luke would actually take Vader's helmet after the unmasking. We'd watch him put it on, and this would give the idea that he'd in fact turn to the dark side. According to Gary Kurtz, there were also versions where he'd walk off alone like a spaghetti western hero, with him going into seclusion in the Tatooine desert. In the end, Lucas opted for a happier ending due to him feeling like merchandise sales would be boosted by closing on a positive note. Either way, that wraps up Return of the Jedi, which would go on to become the highest grossing movie of 1983. Off the back of its $32 million budget, it banked $418 million, with the additional releases taking it to $475. After its release, they dropped 2 Ewoks spin-off movies called Caravan of Courage and The Battle for Endor, which, the less said about the better. Doubt we're going to be doing a classic movie breakdown for those pieces of shit. However, it's undeniable how much of a success this film series was, and this original trilogy still stands as an outstanding achievement. Lucas went against the studios to make one of the biggest film franchises of all time, and it has to be said, it captured the imagination of billions. Now that wraps up our original trilogy breakdown, and huge thank you to everyone who's checked out this series. Extra shout out to the members who pledge money to the channel every week, and it goes such a long way to helping videos like this get made. If you want to support us, then please click the join button, and as a thank you, you'll get access to videos like this every week the second we get them edited. Now, if you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out our breakdown of Starship Troopers on screen right here, right up in the corner, or maybe it's below. Now, over the next couple of weeks, we have a lot that we're covering as well, and we're going to aim to drop videos on Apocalypse Now, The Thing prequel, Terminator 3, and a lot more. We've got breakdowns on Gen V, Ahsoka, and potentially The Exorcist 3 to look forward to as well, so make sure you guys stay locked to the channel. Out of the way, huge thank you for clicking this. I've been Paul, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.